Mr. Purnachandra Rao, President, and friends in the profession. At the outset, I express my heartfelt and grateful thanks to Mr. Purnachandra Rao for having given me this opportunity to share a few thoughts with all of you on this new topic, God. You can come forward instead of those who are sitting, unless you want to be the backbenchers. I deliberately, as Mr. Satyanarayana said, I said there is no need to give a biodata because I was reminded of one great psychiatrist by name Carl Jung of Zurich, who said there is a distinction between achievement on the one hand and the culture or personality on the other hand. Achievement is of the worldly success. The culture or personality depends on the being. There is a distinction between the function and the being. When we function as one, but we are in our natural status. And there, as human beings, we have a level to reach further that is beyond the plain nature, is culture. If one wants to rest on whatever the worldly success, the achievements achieved in the morning's life's morning, then we become totally retired, ineffective, and a burden to ourselves and to the society. That is why one need not rest unless one is in a position to detach. And that is possible if one detaches himself from these achievements, so-called achievements. To put it in his words, he who carries over to the second half of human life the philosophy of the first half, namely the achievement, all that constitutes worldly success, and makes that second half merely a pitiful appendage of life's morning, must pay a heavy price for doing so, with damage to the soul, with diminution of personality, with inner poverty of the spirit. That is where this is quoted by Swami Ranganathananda while writing a preface to a memorial lecture delivered by the great jurist Nani Palkiwala, India's priceless heritage. Because that is where our heritage takes us to a higher plane, the Paravidya, Paraprakriti, as we say. That is the science and technology of that Paravidya is embedded in all our priceless heritage. We have been going away from that. That is the reason for all this moral decay, which Nani Palkiwala calls it as a reason. It is based on the spiritual illiteracy. In that talk, he concluded with a beautiful passage where I quote from his speech. In these days of spiritual illiteracy and poverty of the spirit, when people find that wealth can only multiply itself and attain nothing, when people have to deceive their souls with counterfeits after having killed the poetry of life, it is necessary to remind ourselves that civilization is an act of the spirit. Material progress is not to be mistaken for inner progress. When technology outstrips moral development, the prospect is not that of a millennium, but of extinction. Our ancient heritage is a potent antidote to the current tendency to standardize souls and to seek salvation in herds. That is the quotation from India's Priceless Heritage. That is where the spiritual literacy also has to be enhanced. How this passage or this thought is relevant for the topic of the day, general anti-avoidance rules, we shall see in a short while. We are all aware about avoidance and evasion. Now, avoidance itself is being questioned by the introduction of these sections in the Income Tax Act, because there is a fiscal avarice on the part of the government to improve the revenue collection by any means. There is an old saying, Horace said in 2nd century BC, make money if you can, fair and square, or else by any means. Now, the government is also resorting to that, or else by any means. Call anything as income and tax it. In the modern societies, if you go into the history of taxation, income tax law, first time United Kingdom, Great Britain introduced income tax for meeting the expenses of Napoleonic wars. In Great Britain, income tax was introduced only to meet those war expenses between England and France. The war got over, the expenses were met, but tax continued. Coming to India, for instance, you would find sales tax was introduced first time in 1937 by great Rajaji as Prime Minister of Madras Province to offset the loss of revenue arising out of imposing prohibition. But other states also picked up sales tax without imposing prohibition, because it was a means. Just like we were talking half an hour ago how to improve our finances in the Tax Bar Association, the country always wants to improve the revenues. And as you know, the celebrated statement of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes is, when I pay taxes, I buy civilization. If you recall from that passage, Nani says, civilization is an act of the spirit. How much tax a government should levy on its subjects? Whatever is required for meeting the legitimate public expenditure. This again I am quoting from Rajaji's Mahabharata. There is an interesting story in the Mahabharata of sage Agastya. Sage Agastya, you know, as a saint, got married to a princess Lopamudra. Lopamudra also assumed the life of an ascetic. She also went with him to the forest, wearing only those barks and giving up all her jewels. At a later point of time, Agastya wanted to consummate the marriage. Lopamudra said, I am definitely with you, but for consummation of the marriage, I would like to have my silk robes, silk saris and jewelry, and you should also have the royal robes, and then only we should go ahead raising the family. He said, I am a saint, where would I go for this jewelry, this expensive clothes? I don't have money. She said, you go to any king. Who will say no to you if you ask for money? So Agastya went to one king. He asked for money. The king showed his balance sheet. Here are my receipts, here are my expenditure. If there is any excess surplus, please take it. Agastya found there was neither surplus nor deficit. He said, if I take money from you, Your citizens will suffer. Therefore, I will not take money. Then let me try with some other king. He went to another king. Then this king also followed. If I come to know others are collecting more revenue, I would also try that. So let me see whether somebody else has surplus. So they went from one king after another. Everywhere they found there was neither surplus nor deficit. Because kings of those days taxed their subject citizens only to the extent of rightful public expenditure. The zero-based budgeting, which the Westerners are talking of now, is not a new concept in our country. It was there eons ago, thousands of years ago. Therefore, the government should tax only to the extent of rightful public expenditure. That is why, if you recall, Justice Sabyasachi Mukherjee said, in the case of Arvind Narottam, when people find that there is ostentatious expenditure incurred, indulged in by the government, even an honest taxpayer thinks, why should I contribute to this ostentation and wasteful expenditure? That is why people resort to avoidance. It's part of human nature. Legal avoidance is permissible. Illegal is called evasion. That is a well-known dictum. Now, legal avoidance also has to be tackled according to the government. Based on what? Based on mere suspicion. What is suspicion? As my administrative law lecturer used to say 40 years back, awareness of a fact is knowledge. Awareness of a probability is belief. Awareness of a possibility is suspicion. There is no fact of tax avoidance, tax evasion. There is no reason to believe that there is tax evasion. But there is a suspicion that one of the steps in an arrangement is deemed to be tax avoidance. And that is the basis for all this. If you compare these provisions with similar provisions in the US Internal Revenue Code, there they have not called it as anti-avoidance rules. They have called it as tackling evasion straight away. Evasion is different. This avoidance is different. Then there is one Ingo Walter. He coined the word avoision. What is apparently avoidance but actually evasion? He coined a new word, avoision. Tax avoision. That is what now the government says through this chapter, anti-avoidance rules. They found in the Income Tax Act, sections 95 to 103 are lying vacant. So how to fill it up? They brought it from the Direct Taxes Code Bill, renumbered them and introduced as sections 95 to 102. And if you look at the old sections which were deleted from sections 95 to 102 or 103 to 104 to 110, they were all on super profit tax or super tax or tax on undistributed profits, because there was a regime, there was when profits were not distributed to avoid tax. When it is part of human nature to pay less, to regard the hard-earned money as belonging to oneself. To overcome that, there should be a basic willingness to contribute to the society. How do we buy civilization? Because we have earned all this income from the civilized society, so we contribute back to the civilization for the betterment of the whole society, a portion of that. But everybody wants to keep whatever one has earned. You know, there used to be a joke about that. I mean, there are any number of jokes on lawyers. One of them is a wealthy man in his deathbed would call in US his lawyer, his doctor, and the priest, the Christian father. He would give them $100,000 each in cash. They say one cannot carry the money with him, but when they lower my coffin into the grave, I want you all to throw this money into the grave. So they would collect. And all the three would be throwing something later on when the man died. Envelopes into the grave. And the three were walking out. Then first the priest said, I must confess, see, I was badly in need of some money for the construction of my church. Therefore, I have thrown only $50,000. I've used $50,000 in the construction cost. Then the doctor said, yes, I am also in need of money. Therefore, I have taken away $75,000. I threw in only $25,000. The lawyer said, I didn't want any of the money of the old man. I have thrown a check for $100,000 in his hand. So, that is how one carries on all these things. Nothing can be taken, that if one realizes that. That is where the spiritual literacy also has to be enhanced of the general society. Having served in different parts of the country, I know of certain areas in the country where people are overwhelmingly obedient to the law and where people are overwhelmingly disobedient to the law. Two extremes. There is one pocket in Dakshina Karnataka where the disputed tax also would be first paid by them. Then they would contest. Whereas north of India, most of the people don't believe in obedience to the law. The only law they obey is the law of gravity, because they cannot escape from that. Otherwise it is one bigger danda against another danda. Therefore, even that law of dadagiri they don't obey. It is only the law of gravity. And if they can get away with that, murders, they would. And they do get away. Now, looking at that kind of disobedience to the enforceable law, even those who are obedient to the unenforceable laws get persuaded. Why should I contribute to this wasteful expenditure, as Justice Sabyasachi Mukherjee said? In this backdrop, when we go through these provisions, which have been introduced by Finance Act 2012 into the Income Tax Act, one gets a feeling like the great Tamil poet Thiruvalluvar said in his Tirukkural. I cannot help but quoting from all these verses because they are eternally true. Though they were written, this Tirukkural was also written more than 2000 years ago. Under oppression and misrule, there is an interesting verse which says, Inmayin innadadu udaimai murai seyya mannavan kol kizhpadi. In a country of misrule and oppression, it is a greater sin to be wealthy than to be poor. When extortionist tax is imposed on you, it is a greater sin to be wealthy than to be poor. That is what is coming to when you look at this, the kind of provisions they have introduced. Let us just go into some of these provisions. Then you would appreciate why I said it. Perhaps I had a strange thought when I was going through that. When you look back into the history of the taxing statutes, 1922 Act, then the 61 Act came into force from 1462, that is after 40 years. Now, another 50 years, perhaps 60 years would have been a little more ideal situation. I am reminded of one story narrated by our director at the time of training in the probationary period in 76-77. Every month the director would come to talk to us at random. He would pick his own topic and talk. In the very first or second talk of the director, he said, excuse me, Mr. Sadagopan was our director. He was a great manager and a wonderful human being, highly evolved human being with a ready wit. He said, all of you are adults, therefore I can tell you this. Why man is treated like a dog and after 40, behaves like a dog after 40, or becomes a monkey after 60. Once man, dog and monkey approached God for boons. On sex life, God granted 40 years to man. He said, no, I would like to have more. He said, no, you be satisfied with that. Then the dog was also granted 40 years. Dog said, no, I am happy with 20 years. Immediately man jumped at that. Why don't you give me those 20 years? Tadast, that was granted. Similarly, monkey also was satisfied with 20 years. So those 20 years sacrificed by monkey, again the man jumped at it. He got it. So that is why man behaves like a man for 40 years, and then like a dog for 20 years, then like a monkey after 60. I mean, we are all in these different age groups. I am in the 60 age group now, being a senior citizen. No, see, it is all, that is why once woman made equal to man becomes a superior. Loknath will readily agree, or he must take permission to say so. Now, this statute, it got changed after 40 years, originally from 22 to 62. The present statute is nearing 60 and it is getting completely overhauled. But even before it is getting completely overhauled, this chapter alone is taken out of the Direct Taxes Code Bill and put here. And then because of the hue and cry, it is now postponed by one more year. It is always a case of sentence first, judgment later. Here also, you see, it says, the provisions of this chapter shall be applied in accordance with such guidelines and subject to such conditions and the manner as may be prescribed. It has not been prescribed. Of course, now they will say it is not coming into force immediately, therefore we need not prescribe. But take my word, even they would not prescribe it as on 1/4/2013, because this is supposed to come in from assessment year 2014-15. That means financial year 13-14. These rules will not be prescribed because they are left to everybody's imagination. When you read these sections, you will appreciate why should we have this kind of an income tax act. I would, after reading out some of these provisions, I would submit my own shorter drafting of the Income Tax Act, which will be comprising of only 3 sections. We need not waste every year so much time in studying, analyzing, learning, unlearning and relearning all these provisions. Let us look at the very first provision, application of General Anti-Avoidance Rule, section 95. Notwithstanding anything contained in the Act, it doesn't say in this Act, notwithstanding anything contained in the Act, an arrangement entered into by an assessee may be declared to be an impermissible avoidance arrangement, and the consequence in relation to tax arising therefrom may be determined subject to the provisions of this chapter. Now, this is notwithstanding the charging sections, notwithstanding any other section, notwithstanding anything contained in the Act. That can be any Act. Explanation: for the removal of doubts, it is hereby declared that the provisions of this chapter may be applied to any step in or a part of the arrangement as they are applicable to the arrangement. As they are applicable to the arrangement. Now, arrangement is also, which is a common word, which is defined here. I will take you through the definition in a short while. Before that, there are very interesting drafting carried out in this section. Arrangement to lack commercial substance. An arrangement shall be deemed to lack commercial substance if the substance or effect of the arrangement as a whole is inconsistent with or differs significantly from the form of its individual step or a part, or it involves or includes round trip financing, an accommodating party, elements that have effect of offsetting or cancelling each other. I mean, how these provisions contradict themselves, we need not search elsewhere. There are other provisions which contradict this. Now, what remains after all this reading is really only confusion. Ultimately, it is left to the whims and fancies of the assessing officer. That is why I said, instead of having all these provisions, we can have a shorter Income Tax Act with only 3 sections, which I would come to at the end of my talk. Here, there is another gem. For the purposes of this chapter, a party to an arrangement shall be an accommodating party if the main purpose of the direct or indirect participation of that party in the arrangement, in whole or in part, is to obtain directly or indirectly a tax benefit, but for the provisions of this chapter, for the assessee, whether or not the party is a connected person in relation to any party to the arrangement. Now, directly or indirectly, whether or not there is a benefit or not, they all cancel out each other. The pinnacle of this obfuscation, that is confusion, which comes here, Section 96, subsection 2, an arrangement shall be presumed to have been entered into or carried out. Please kindly listen. An arrangement shall be presumed to have been entered into or carried out for the main purpose of obtaining a tax benefit if the main purpose of a step in or a part of the arrangement is to obtain a tax benefit. First it says, for the main purpose of obtaining the tax benefit. Then the later portion says, notwithstanding the fact that the main purpose of the whole arrangement is not to obtain a tax benefit. I am again reading it. An arrangement shall be presumed to have been entered into or carried out for the main purpose of obtaining the tax benefit, notwithstanding the fact that the main purpose of the whole arrangement is not to obtain a tax benefit. It is in the very same subsection. Notwithstanding the fact. Now you kindly recall my verse which I said a few minutes ago. What is a fact? Awareness of a fact is knowledge. Awareness of a probability is belief. Awareness of a possibility is suspicion. Now here the revenue only suspects that there is a tax benefit. In spite of the fact, tax benefit is not the main purpose. In spite of the fact. Now, when you are talking about the fact, there is no legal issue involved. The fact speaks for itself. But despite the fact that the main purpose is not to derive a tax benefit, it shall be presumed. So once he says, there is a tax benefit only for this you have done this. The simplest illustration is even your investment in section 80C. Section 80C, any investment made to get the benefit of section 80C can also be brought to tax by virtue of this section. Because it shall be presumed. Notwithstanding the fact that there is tax benefit is not the real thing. You have a life insurance policy or you put the money in PPF for long-term savings. Nothing is to be presumed otherwise. It shall be presumed.
So bar will apply to only to the taxpayers and not to the non-tax payers.
Pardon?
It is applicable to only tax payers, all the intellectual people. Who doesn't know anything, who doesn't plan anything, it will not apply at all.
No. That is, those who are, see, in all these things you would find the main culprits will always get away. This is only tax avoidance. What you have done is tax avoidance. Therefore, it shall be presumed. And in the mind of the assessing officer, it occurs that it is an avoidance scheme. That is enough to bring you into the net. See, who is the sufferer even in an arson case or a riot case? The fellows who are the main culprits for causing the riot will be the first one to escape. It's only some casual bystander or onlooker who would get caught. Some innocent fellow. So where illegal activity is bliss, innocence is punished. Where illegal activity is bliss, it is a folly to be innocent. It is a folly to be innocent. Yes, it is always the case. No, even you take a case where no accounts, like 44 AD and all that, then 8% straight away. When you have books of accounts only, or as the old saying goes, only the fruit-bearing tree gets all the stones. Nobody throws stones on a barren tree. That is the case here. The law-abiding citizen is the worst sufferer. Ultimately, if it boils down to that. The law-abiding citizen is the worst sufferer.
Always, sir, always.
Always.
Most times 15 seats were won yesterday. 15 seats were won yesterday.
Let me tell you, in fact, when I was in the department, particularly in the investigation wing, both in Karnataka and later on in Bombay, almost all my searches were eligible for claiming reward. I can say with pardonable pride, I have never claimed reward. But even in the biggest case, Harshad Mehta's case, when I did not lodge any claim for reward, and my officers I was DDI as we were known as then, the ADs I wanted to put in a claim for reward. I said, if you put in a claim, I will definitely recommend and forward it. But let me give you a word of caution. The moment your claim goes, because we were eligible for something like 10 crore of reward. There was no informant in the picture. It was conceived and executed by us after working for more than 6 months. Therefore, our units, particularly those 7-8 people core group, including myself, were eligible for almost 10 crore reward. My share would have been more than a crore. I said, the moment you send the claim, people who are processing these papers would think they are paying out of their pocket, which is not the case. Then they would try to pick holes in your work. You have left off this, you have left off that, you have made money here, you have made money there. Therefore, they will make out a vigilance case on you. And then you will be made to run from pillar to post. What do you think? And my boys took my advice in the right spirit, because I always say it requires more wisdom to take an advice than to give it. But they were wise enough to take my advice, and they did not lodge any claim. That is why all of us never lost our sleep over it. Even now, I can get sleep whenever and wherever I want. I can digest the food, whatever I eat. These are biggest tax-free wealth. Here, the anti-avoidance thing, when you go into, why I said they cancel out each other themselves, it boils down consequences of impermissible avoidance arrangement. If an arrangement is declared to be an impermissible avoidance arrangement declared by the AO, then the consequences in relation to tax of the arrangement, including denial of tax benefit or a benefit under a tax treaty, shall be determined in such manner as is deemed appropriate. Now everything is left open. The denial of tax benefit or a benefit under a tax treaty shall be determined in such manner as is deemed appropriate, is not as prescribed. Now, as is deemed appropriate by whom? In the circumstances of the case, including the by way of but not limited to the following: disregarding, combining, recharacterizing any step. That is disregarding the whole arrangement. Treating the impermissible avoidance arrangement as if it had not been entered into or carried out. You apply this to give you a live example. If you have gone through the Vodafone decision, Supreme Court's decision in Vodafone case, 341 ITR page 1. It is very interesting. I wrote an article on that, which was also published in 341 ITR 2 weeks before the budget, to explain the concept of Vodafone action. Transactions. I brought in a story from Tenali Rama's collections. In a gist, the facts of Vodafone, all the controlling interest they got by virtue of transfer of only one share in Cayman Islands. Only one share. That one share was held by a non-resident company, sold to another non-resident company. Now the department said, by buying that one share, you got control over this interest. 67% can vary, it can go up to, or including some future buyouts. There were bids, all that. Now can they tax this controlling interest, which are situated in India? But what was transferred was only one share in Cayman Islands. To explain this concept, I gave the story. In fact, some commissioners from Bombay and Gujarat rang me up after reading my article that they understood the case after reading this story. Tenali Rama fell ill. He was seriously ill. So his wife prayed that if Tenali Rama were to recover fully, she would get the horse of belonging to them sold in the next Shandy day and give 50% of the sale proceeds to the Vaidya, the doctor who was treating. And she did not tell Tenali Rama when he was suffering from the illness. After he recovered, she told him. He said, "You are a fool, how can you take such a woe? This horse is worth 100 sovereigns. Anyway, the next Shandy day, the Vaidya also accompanied Tenali Rama, And Tenali Rama carried a cat with him. The Vaidya asked him, "What for is this cat?" He said, "That is none of your business. You are concerned about the horse. You should not ask about the cat." The cat was quoted in the auction for 100 sovereigns, and the horse was 1 sovereign. Whomsoever wants to buy the horse should buy the cat. They are only as a package, sold as a package. So it was worth 100 sovereigns, therefore ultimately somebody bought it for 101 sovereigns, and Tenali Rama gave half a sovereign to the doctor. He said, "This is 50% of the sale process of the horse." Now, I wrote there a further twist in this. Only the cat was sold outside the country, and the company got control over the horse here. And there was no consideration paid for the horse at all, because the entire consideration was paid for the cat. That is how the whole transaction has been put through. Section 9 does not talk of any transfer of an asset outside India. That is how the Supreme Court went strictly by the law, applying the provisions as they existed. And now, lo and behold, they are amended with retrospective effect from 1462. On top of that, you would appreciate if you see section 119 of the Finance Act, which was appearing as clause 113 in the Finance Bill. If you see the Finance Act, I'll just read section 119, which is a validation of demand, etc. under Income Tax Act 1961 in certain cases. Now, this is specifically introduced to cover Vodafone type of transactions. And mind you, nothing stops the executive imposing its will through such sections on all other demands also that may be raised or purported to be raised under the Income Tax Act. It's a very interesting provision. Notwithstanding anything contained in any judgment, decree or order of any court or tribunal or any authority. Notwithstanding anything contained in any judgment of any court. All notices sent or purporting to have been sent. Notices sent or purporting to have been sent. So even in the AO thought he has sent the notice, it is enough. Or taxes levied, demanded, assessed, imposed, collected or recovered, or purporting to have been levied, demanded, assessed or imposed or recovered under the provisions of the Income Tax Act 1961 in respect of income accruing or arising through or from the transfer of a capital asset situate in India in consequence of the transfer of a share or shares of a company registered or incorporated outside India. In consequence of that, there is a transfer taking place, or in consequence of an agreement or otherwise outside India, shall be deemed to have been validly made, that is, notwithstanding the judgment, otherwise, the demand shall be deemed to have been validly made, and the notice, levy, demand, assessment, imposition, collection or recovery of tax shall be valid and shall be deemed always to have been valid, and shall not be called in question on the ground that the tax was not chargeable or any ground including that it is a tax on capital gains arising out of transactions which have taken place outside India. And accordingly, any tax levied, demanded, assessed, imposed or deposited before the commencement of this Act, that is before the commencement of Finance Act 2012, and chargeable for the period prior to such commencement, that is even before the Finance Act 2012 came, but not collected or recovered before such commencement may be collected or recovered and appropriated in accordance with the provisions of the Income Tax Act. Therefore, even if the decree or judgment nullifies the demand raised earlier and it has been passed before this act came in, now this is specifically for Vodafone type of transactions. You may recall, service tax was introduced like this in 1994 and the whole year's collection was 1000 crore. Now service tax has crossed 1 lakh crore. In less than 20 years, it has gone up to 100 times. Similarly, this kind of demand can be raised for anything, especially tomorrow they can extend this section 119 of Finance Act 2012. They will amend it to include any type of demand, not only for this, any type of demand which is raised under the so-called anti-avoidance provisions. That is why I said I have drafted a very small Income Tax Act, just 1 page Income Tax Act. This shall be called the Indian Income Tax Act 2014 because it is going to coincide with that. Subsection 2, it shall come into force on All Fools' Day every year. Subsection 3, it extends to the whole of India as understood by the AO. Whole of India as understood by the AO. If he says that your income on Antarctica is also taxable in India, it is taxable. That is section 1. Section 2, income tax shall be charged by an order in writing to be passed by the AO on an income to be arrived at on mutual consultation with the assessee at a rate to be mutually fixed, payable in 12 monthly installments commencing from the immediate succeeding calendar month. That is subsection 1 of section 2. Subsection 2, the order passed under subsection 1 is not appealable, nor auditable, nor revisable. Subsection 3, the Income Tax Act 1961 and the Income Tax Act 1922 are hereby repealed with immediate effect, including in respect of all pending proceedings before any forum. So section 3, this act shall be included in the 9th schedule to the Constitution of India, so that the constitutional validity is not questioned. So friends, I do not want to take much more of your time. These anti-avoidance rules are a farce. Let us have the courage to call a spade in every forum which is available to us and get it nullified in the years to come. Thank you very much.